Hi. In this video, we are going to cover a summary of Chapter 3, Governing Data and Information Assets. Data governance is the overall administration through clearly defined procedures and plans that assures the availability, the integrity, security, and usability of the structured and unstructured data available to an organization. So, information governance uses policies, procedures, and multidisciplinary arrangements to manage and optimize an organization's information for its immediate and future needs, which may include regulatory, legal, risk, environmental, and operational requirements. The concept of governance has various meanings, and its characteristics and definition depend on the desired end results or goals to be achieved in the domain and to the level in which governance is applied. So, in this text, it mentions that the definition of governance is difficult to express in a concise sentence. So, governance includes three components: authority, decision making, and accountability. So, the general definition determines who has the power, who makes the decisions, and then how other players make their voices heard and how account is rendered. So, governance again includes three components: authority, decision making, and accountability. So, corporate governance is the terminology often used to describe the roles and responsibilities of board of directors who protect the shareholders' interests in a publicly held company. So, corporate governance exercises authority across the enterprise through a framework and a structure. And the framework consists of policies, rules, and practices. And those practices govern the relationship between the board of directors, the managers, the shareholders of corporations, as well as the stakeholders who may be employees, customers, suppliers, or creditors. So, a formal organization structure sets the company's objectives and provides a means for obtaining and monitoring the achievement of these objectives through the assigned roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. So, the purpose of let's say corporate governance or organizational structure is really to influence the behavior of an organizational or of the organization's employees and other stakeholders in support of the organization goals. So enterprise governance is visible in every aspect of an organization through its establishment, its application, and monitoring of policies and procedures. So, typical departments that corporate governance or enterprise governance applies to would be departments such as these, auditing and accounting, human resources, financial reporting, risk management, and data and information. So I thought this was a little bit interesting just to give you a visual about how corporate governance starts and then how it's broken down into data and information governance. And then you'll see the duties of both are practically the same, right? But again, data and information is not the same, which is why they are separate. Okay, so on page 76 of your textbook, figure 3.1 is a sample of formal definitions demonstrating the differing perspective amongst organizations and experts in the field about the meaning of information governance and data governance. So again, there's no agreed upon definition. It really depends on the source that's defining the terms. So this could be industry or discipline based, it can be vendor based, it can be organization based, or based solely on academics. So data governance and information governance have some core concepts. So while the definitions and the functions may vary, there are several core concepts that are associated with both. So one, the given authority, it consists of an enterprise level authority, which is the power to establish a governance program, and the accountability answerability for its effectiveness in data or information asset management. Next is they have the authority or the shared component of establishing the program or the shared concept of establishing the program. So it establishes and monitors policies, standards, practice, decision rights, and accountabilities for managing, using, improving, and protecting organizational information in corporate data. So another core concept is the execution of the program. So it execute programs through the policy, standards, and practices through formal structures, roles, and responsibilities. So what are some examples of data governance or input or output? So data governance focus on data input. So what is an example of input? Data models, metadata management, master data management, content management, data quality, and data security management. Data governance was emerged in the 90s to address the quality in data warehouses. It includes structured and unstructured data. It includes policies to ensure that data is consistently defined, structured, accurate, and current across the enterprise. So when we look at information governance focuses on output. So what are examples of output? That's going to be your release of information, retention and disposal policies, documentation requirements, legal holds, regulatory compliance, records management, ethical use of information, intellectual property ownership. So information governance emerged in 2004 as a framework for information privacy and security, excuse me. And then it includes policies for records, documents, and information to ensure confidentiality, regulatory compliance, retention, disposal, and ethical use of information. So I think this is a great figure that really shows you the input. So when we talk about data, right, we put data into something, whether that be the electronic health record, but then the information that we get out is different because that data has now turned into something, right? So we get out the reports, we get out the release of information or the information that we are releasing. So I thought this was an interesting figure that really does help you visualize what this looks like or the comparison of the functions. Okay, so next is going to be the DIKW pyramid or paradigm, you may seen it referred to as. So what does this mean? So this pyramid is the foundation of the pyramid is data. Each level in the hierarchy is dependent on the previous level. So when we look at data, data is facts, right? Basic information. Once we try and understand that or better understand that data by understanding the relationships or the context in which that data was built off of, that's how we get information. Right. And then what we do with that information, how we interpret that information, as we determine patterns in that information, that's how we build knowledge. Right. And then what we do with that knowledge is how we create wisdom. Okay, so understanding of those principles is how we create wisdom. Okay, so wisdom requires knowledge, knowledge requires information, information requires data. Okay, so these are different functions that require different governance. So just the visual, you can read a little bit more about it in your textbook. Um, Okay, so let's talk about the perspectives of information governance. There are a number of information governance frameworks. However, for the sake of time, we're only going to talk about the three that are outlined in your textbook. The term information governance was first used scientifically at the National Health Service in England as a framework for governing security and confidentiality for electronic record systems. So the Association of Records Management and Administrators International, well, hold that thought. So when I talk about the National Health Service Information Governance Principles. That one was developed in England, and it consists of 7 guiding principles that organizations should use for access to patient data. Okay, so then after that framework, we're going to talk a little bit about GARP. GARP is the generally accepted record keeping principles. That one was developed by the ARMA International, and that's the Association of Records Management and Administrators. Okay. And that was one of the first professional organizations that tackled the development of the information governance framework back in 2008. It then updated the framework in 2017. Okay, so then came the Information Governance Principles for Healthcare, the IGPHC. Okay, this one was developed by AHIMA back in 2014, and it was developed to closely align with the GARP principles. And those so it's composed of 8 principles and 10 organizational competencies for providing standard information handling practices for healthcare organizations. So those 8 principles are principles of accountability, principles of transparency, integrity, protection, compliance, availability, retention, and disposition. Okay, so data management domains. So the data life cycle. So a life cycle is made up of a series of successive stages, and it always has a beginning and end point. So plants, animals, and businesses all have life cycles. So from a systems perspective, a life cycle is a component of a larger system. And typical life cycle functions require data governance are these functions. What data are collected, standards for data capture, standards for data storage, standards for data retention, processes for data access, processes for data distribution, standards for data archival, and then standards for data disposal. So data architecture. What is data architecture? Data architecture is defined as specifications used to describe existing states, define existing requirements, guide data integration, and control data assets put forward in a data strategy. So the artifacts, so it integrates specification artifacts by establishing standards, policies, procedures for data collection, storage, and integration, standards for information systems and design, identification and documentation of requirements, development and maintenance of data models. So you might say, well, what are the facts? So, or the artifacts, right? So the artifacts um, developed through architecture data management, such as data models, use cases, data flow diagrams, and data dictionary. Those are as important to data management as the blueprints prepared by an architect to a building design and maintenance. So metadata management, I believe we touched a little bit on this in chapter 3. So metadata is often referred to as data about data. And they are structured information used to increase the effective use of data. So metadata management provides structural information that describes, explains, locates, or helps retrieve or use or manage information. So it helps to manage data dictionaries, establish enterprise metadata strategies, develop policies and procedures for metadata identification, management, and use, establish standards for metadata schemas, establish and implement metadata metrics, and then monitor policy implementation. So master data management. Master data management refers to master data that an enterprise maintains about key business entities such as their customers, employees, their patients, in reference that in reference data that is used to classify other data or identify allowable values for data. So I know that sounds a little bit tricky, but um, management of key business data requires identifying reference data sources, whether that be through databases or files, maintaining authoritative values lists and metadata, and then establishing organizational data sets, defining and maintaining match rules, and reconciling system of record. So when I hear this, I immediately think of those abbreviations that are in our health record and how we match those rules for it to mean something. Like, for example, when we talk about a state and we use the abbreviation. So, for example, for Florida, we're going to use FL. We tell the system to match FL to Florida, right? Or if that zip code, we type the 5 X's, right? Showing you that this data field needs to be made up of 5 numeric characters to make up a zip code. These are the type of values that the master data is referring to. So I hope that makes sense. So content and record management. Content management encompasses both data that is structured. So data that is structured, for example, are the data that's stored in a database. And then unstructured data, that's data that's stored in a text document. So structured data commonly refers to data that is organized and easily retrievable and interpreted by traditional databases and data models. So when we think of unstructured data, this is data that do not have any predefined data models, or they're not stored in a traditional database structure. So the management of unstructured data requires developing and implementing policies and procedures for the organization and categorizing unstructured data in electronic, paper, image, audio files for its delivery, use, reuse, and preservation. Okay. And then developing and adopting taxonomy systems or taxonomic systems, excuse me, and then developing and maintaining an information architecture and metadata schema that identifies links and relationships among documents and defines the content within the document. Okay, so data security management. Data security is the process in which organizations implement protection measures and tools for safeguarding data and information from unauthorized, accidental, unintentional modification, destruction, or use. So data security management includes policies and procedures that address confidentiality and security concerns of organizational stakeholders. So some protection measures and safeguards for data. You want to make sure that the data security, that planning and organization takes place, that the development, implementation, and enforcement of data security policies and procedures take place, that we incorporate risk management, business continuity, right? And those, or as well as those audit trails. So these are some examples of protection measures and safeguards for that data. So useful functions associated with enterprise information intelligence that requires data governance include the following. Okay, assessing current intelligence needs, resources, and use. So this is specifically referring to information intelligence in big data. We talked a little bit about big data in chapter 3 as well. And then when you think of what is the information intelligence, it's the management of applications and technologies for gathering, storing, analyzing, and providing data for decisions, right? In your book, you'll also see it referred to as business intelligence, BI. So we must assess the current intelligence needs, resources, and use. We must determine the scope, requirements, and architecture for enterprise intelligence. And then we must develop and implement policies and procedures for enterprise information intelligence. So data quality management is characterized as a continuous process, setting standards, building quality onto the processes to create, transform, and store data and measure data against standards. So typical functions of a data quality management program that typically requires data governance includes ensuring that the data quality standards or characteristics are met. And we do that by identifying data quality requirements and establishing data quality metrics, identifying and carrying out data quality projects, profiling data and measuring conformance to establish quality metrics and business rules, identifying data quality problems and assessing their root cause, managing data quality issues, implementing data quality improvement measures, and then providing training for ensuring data quality. So terminology and classification management. We'll talk a lot about terminology in some of the later chapters, but terminology and classification management ensures the appropriate adoption, maintenance, dissemination, and accessibility of the vocabularies, terminologies, classifications, and code sets for systemic interoperability and data integrity. So I know when I covered chapter 3, I talked a little bit about SNOMED and GEMS, and these are the types of terminology and classification systems that we're referring to here. So it's about developing an algorithmic translations, concepts, representations, and mapping among clinical nomenclatures. Okay, and it's about providing oversight for clinical and diagnostic coding to ensure compliance within established standards. So governance program planning. Information governance or data governance program requires 7 steps for development, or it has 7 steps for development, implementation, and maintenance. So those 7 steps are to develop a value statement, to prepare a program roadmap, to plan and fund the program, to design the program, deploy the program, govern the data or information, and then to monitor the program, monitor its effectiveness, and to report the results. So some commonalities. We talked a little bit about commonalities, but these are about commonalities in the data governance frameworks. So some of the commonalities are that it views data as a corporate asset, requiring the same priority for management as other high-stake organizational assets. It's an enterprise-wide program that's linked to the organizational strategy and supported by a business case. So the portfolio of data governance initiatives is determined by the organizational strategy. So data governance frameworks are always, or usually show, one of the commonalities is that it shows a repetitive process. It initially prioritizes incentives and focuses on a small select business imperatives that quickly deliver value and expand as the program matures. So it's always, well, I don't want to say always, but another commonality is that it's a collaborative effort requiring participation from all organizational levels and stakeholders. Another one is that it specifies who has the authority and the accountability for data decisions and who is responsible for carrying out the activities associated with these decisions. So this requires identification and is written in the documents for priorities, goals, main activities, roles, responsibilities that are typically undertaken. So, the Data Governance Institute framework has some rules of engagement. And the rules of engagement is really the way that the stakeholders interact with each other. Okay, the framework outlines that. So I'll show that to you on the next slide. And then it talks a little bit. So there's three different categories, right? So the rules and engagements, or the rules and rules of engagement. And then there's the people in organizational bodies and those that are responsible for the operation of the data governance program. And then the data governance processes. And that typically outlines the steps required for governing data and ensuring compliance with data governance policies and standards. So this is what it looks like. Okay. Rules of engagement, people, and organizational bodies who are responsible, and then the actual processes. So the ARMA International Framework has 4 different levels, or is it 5? I want to say it might be 5. Yes, exactly. It's 5 different levels, and this wraps up the end of this chapter. So the first level is the substandard level, and it's the principle that is minimally addressed, not addressed, or sporadically addressed, right? So this is how you are assessing your organization, right? Based on these levels. So if you reach a level 2, that means that it's in development. So you are recognizing that the principle that has an impact on the organization, but practices are ill-defined, incomplete, marginally effective, or insufficiently developed, leaving the organization vulnerable to legal or regulatory risk. A level 3 is essential. So depending on the task, it's going to tell you the required levels, and then you can determine again where your organization stands based on this information. So level 3 is essential. There are defined policies and procedures in the implementation processes that support the principle, but there are additional opportunities for streamlining business processes and controlling costs in this area. Okay, so if it's a level 4, then you're being proactive. So it supports the principles with a focus on continuous improvement with information governance issues, routinized and integrated into the business decisions. And then if it's a level 5, it's more transformational. So what that means is the information governance is embedded into the organization's infrastructure and the business processes that such that compliance with the organization's policies and legal and regulatory routines or responsibilities are routine, excuse me. So I hope that makes sense. All right, well, if you have any questions about this particular chapter, or you want to talk a little bit more about these concepts in more detail, please drop your comments below in the Q&A forum for Domain 1.